Right, Mary, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the September 13th property meeting of the William Penn School District. This evening, we will be discussing our long-range facilities master plan. And specifically, we're talking about our demographic study. I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. B. Coates, who will give us some background and introduce our speaker for this evening.
Good evening, board members, and to those attendees. We thank you for joining us this evening. I wanted to start off by just reminding the board that when we completed the long-range school facilities master plan, KCBA did make a recommendation to us to try to, one, maintain or achieve an 85% utilization rate in most of our schools. Also keep in mind that we are planning to change the grade configuration to K-5 for elementary, 6-8 to middle, and 9-12 to high school. So with those recommendations, one being the 85% utilization, two being the grade configurations, we were also looking at the additional number of seats we would need to acquire that 85% capacity. And in the presentation by KCBA, it was shown to us that we would need approximately 300 and 350 additional seats. And when you take that number of seats divided by an average class size of 25 students, it comes up to about 14 classrooms. So then the question became, okay, well, if you need 14 classrooms, where do you put them? How would that look within a district that's a K-5, 6, 8, 9, 12? We had various discussions about that. From those discussions, I felt as though it was very important for us to look at our demographics as well as live births. Prior to my arrival in the district, Mr. Montgomery and his company and company representatives conducted a study for our district. And so I went back to him and I asked, could you please update some of that information so that that would then guide some of our thinking going forward. So that brings us to tonight, where Mr. Montgomery will highlight some demographic data as well as some live birth data. And then after he does that, we will address any questions that board members may have. So I hope that brief historical review is helpful as he goes throughout his update tonight. And so, Jeff, are you going to pull up the presentation? And then Mr. Montgomery, I'm going to ask you, Mr. Montgomery, these are our board members. We have Board Member Luella Richardson. Jan Tong is the property chair. Valerie Cook Henry, Mr. Bill Callahan, and I believe that's all the board members that are here at this present time. So Mr. Montgomery, I'm going to turn it over to you. And what we have up showing on the screen is the actual demographic study.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening. And thank you for bringing Montgomery Educational Consultants and Absolute Technology back to do the live birth update from the presentation that we had presented back in July of 2019. Back then, we had shown that the enrollment was slightly going up each year. It was leveling off, and the live births were continuing at approximately 2%. In light of that, we noticed that when we did the last live births, which was back this past July, we noticed that after the 2018 data, which was not the data we had, the way the state works, they're always a year behind. So we had 2017 data for the report that was during the 2018-19 school year. Subsequent to that, there was a drop in live births, which you'll see as we go on when we get into that section. But on the demographic side, and the demographics is basically what drives the enrollment projection, because that tells us not only the live births, but what kind of movement or growth within each of the boroughs. So that's why we want to start with that. What we have found recently, which is back May, June, and July, was that on the 2010 versus the 2020 census, each of your boroughs, except for Colwyn, had gone up, some slightly, but they all went up in their actual population, which is a good thing. What that's showing is that there is some growth in each of the boroughs. That information specifically is within the body of the document that's in front of you. So Jeff, you just rolled up a little bit, we'll be able to come to that part. Yeah, right there, yeah. Albany, as you can see, went up 2.2%. Colwyn then, as mentioned, went down. Darby Borough went up 0.3, and then if you continue that up, other ones, East Lansdowne 1.7. Lansdowne Borough had the greatest increase of 4.6, and they have probably what would be considered the most construction going on. And then Yeadon went up. Well, Yeadon went up 5.3. So you've had nice growth in the boroughs, excluding Colwyn. With construction, there's some new apartments being built in Lansdowne. If you're familiar with the property, they call the Christmas Tree Lot on Baltimore Pike. There's some apartments being built there. The largest complex actually being built is in Darby Borough. On Quarry Street, and that's going to be a couple hundred units, and they're going to be fair market value, and they're going to be 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. So there's very good possibility you might get some students out of that area. So again, on the demographic side, we're seeing that the boroughs themselves have shown some growth, and that there is a little bit of construction going on, nothing large. So if we get into the next section, which is the live birth, Jeff, if you could just switch over to that document. Do we have any questions on the demographic piece first? Because instead of trying to give you too much all at once.
Doesn't look like we do, Mr. Montgomery.
Okay.
Continue.
Okay, it's pretty self-explanatory. Each of the boroughs have gone up in size, population from 2010 to 20. The live birth analysis, well, I was slightly alluding to earlier, the live births have dropped off. This is not unusual. There was some kind of a baby bust that happened from around 18 to, and it's still going on. A number of the school districts in Delaware County were affected by it. Most of them have shown either stable or less than stable growth. What we found in William Penn was a drop. And the live births do directly affect the students that come to school. So with each student, each kindergarten student or each student that's born 5 years later, 57% of them show up at your school. And that's a very consistent number. It's been for 13 years. It's right in that 57% area. And which means when a student's born, by the time they reach 5, 57% of them attend the school. So others could have moved out somewhere in between. They could have gone to a private or parochial school or whatever, homeschool or whatever. But that's a pretty consistent number. And now we're seeing 57% of a little smaller number, considering that the live births up until 2021, because again, they're 1 year behind. Just quickly on that, the hospitals report to the vital statistics at the state, and the state turns that information over. Initially, they call preliminary, and then they turn over the actual, usually within a year later. And the only reason we can figure on that is because nobody really presses them to get it accurate like every month. So if we could flip down there, you can see that each of the municipalities, the boroughs, have each kind of slightly dropped. Next slide, Jeff, please. One more down, past that, yeah. most of these are going to just see charts, but in most cases, yes, that one, the one with the next one down, the one with the verbiage. I guess it must be up, Jeff. They're all just charts that just kind of, yeah, that. You see that Oldenboro has fluctuated. They're kind of going up and down. Colwyn has definitely decreased, and that probably reflects that their population has decreased. Darby Borough is somewhat stabilized. It has slightly gone down, but in the last couple of years, it's stabilized. East Lansdowne's very consistent also. And then Lansdowne Borough had probably the best growth, and then Yeadon. So we're seeing a drop in some areas, leveling in others, and then Alden probably had the largest increase, and which probably reflects why they're one of the most crowded of your schools. So if we continue down, the rest will be pretty much just the graphs. And then we could go down and you'll see those lines showing some of the project drops over, that's over like a 13-year period. You can see back, it goes as far back as 91, but for our record, for our usage, we go back 13 years before a student would pretty much start pre-K. So you can run down, Jeff. Let's see if it's the rest of it's all charts. So yeah. There you see that the live births, well, the students, as mentioned, is consistent with that 57%. And what we're seeing is that there's less students enrolling, which in turn means there's smaller class sizes, and we're projecting using these numbers that your overall enrollment and will slightly go down within the years. As of today, Dr. Picos had mentioned to me that your enrollment for this year to this point has gone up from where it ended in June. So perhaps we are seeing some possibility of people moving into the community, and that's where your growth is coming from, and not necessarily from the births. But to go back to the 2018-2019 report, I had walked each of the building with the then superintendent, and what we did find was that it kind of dovetails to what Dr. Picos had said initially, is that the overall facilities are overcrowded or crowded. At that time, you had portable classrooms in use, mobile classrooms. You had an attached type building on the East Lansdowne School that was being utilized. I understand still being utilized. And the only new construction you had had in years was the work to the Ardmore Elementary School. So I did find 5 years ago they were overcrowded. The point of one of the points at that time was the possibility of closing Colwyn, which was shown that it couldn't be done because of the schools. Yeadon was another one, Alden, very overcrowded. So if you're looking to get to those projections that were spoken about as far as 85% utility, the utilization of the buildings, if you want to try to reduce class size, if there's programs you want to add to the buildings, probably the only way you could do it right now is with construction or a massive moving of students. Probably on the plus side, showing that the enrollment has slightly ticked down over the years, and it would take time to do any construction. By the time you do a design, you come up with a plan, the architectural approvals from the state, etc. You're going to need 2 to 3 years anyway. So with the enrollment the way it is, and if it continues on a slight decrease, it should come together at a good point when you finally start adding on come into a plan with the architect as to what you want to do. So with that said, I'm going to, again, leave it open for any questions on the enrollment projections or my last statement about what I found that the facilities were overcrowded. Or statements.
Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. I'm going to open the floor to the other board members for questions. Jen, is that your hand up?
It is. I
Okay.
had to put it near my face, so it's not blurry. Hi, Mr. Montgomery. Good to see you again.
Yeah, hello, Jeff. It's really nice to see you.
I'm just wondering, you said 57% of live births end up in kindergarten. Is that, from your experience, a pretty average number?
Well, no, not really, Jennifer. Probably average is about 65 to 70.
Okay,
High would be about 80. So 57 is a little bit on the low side, yes.
okay, thank you very much.
But you did say that that is consistent within our district, though.
Very consistent. If you had an opportunity to read the report, it goes back those 13 years and it goes back to 91. And if you get a chance to read it, the Absolute Technology had kind of like, not necessarily graph, but in verbiage, showed 55, 58, 57, 56, just very consistent, very, very consistent.
Thank you. Any other questions from any other board members?
This coincides with the update of August 5th with the recommendations.
Is that for me or?
Or I just want to, just for clarification purposes. Long-range school facilities master plan follow-up to the board members' questions. And then we received the demographic update here. That's live births here, I assume. That it's from Absolute Technology. And then there's a series of recommendations. So that's what we're talking about. We're on the same page, Jan?
I think those were recommendations from Dr. B. Coates. I think those are what you're
Okay.
referencing.
But in reference to the report from Absolute.
Yes, I think these are the numbers that were referenced on that. Particular.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So my question, Mr. Montgomery, is that you're seeing the trend for our population ticking down. Do you have a projection as to what that percentage is that's ticking down? 1% over 10 years, 2 years, something to that effect?
I think we looked at somewhere between 1% and 2%. We were looking at the live births up to present. We did not do like an enrollment projection much beyond where we are. But if the live births numbers continue to drop and you continue to get to 57%, you're probably looking at the 1%. That's when I had mentioned that kind of gives you time to formulate what you might need to do with the architect, because my experience there, you're looking at like 3 to 4 years.
Okay, and the
for-
1% is over, I forget, how many years? The 1% drop?
I would say at least 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
But additionally, any decrease in live births is not factored into general population growth, which is increasing in all the boroughs. And I guess along with that, families moving into the boroughs and not older residents. Therefore, more school-age children should possibly be attending that are not a result of live birth.
That would be a possibility, yes. And if the housing sales are brisk and families are switching from single family or husband, wife to a family with school-age children, I think that's what we saw in Alden, or I should say, I believe that's what I see, not we. I believe that's what I see in Alden. is that some of the homes are selling school-age children. Not necessarily the case in Lansdowne. Lansdowne seems to have a large increase, but the student population is pretty much just not quite going up to the degree of the borough's population.
Can I ask a question, Jen?
Yes, go ahead.
When you looked at Lansdowne, you looked at the plan for those 3 apartment buildings, correct?
Yes,
Right, and,
one of them is 55 and older.
right,
The
go on.
Simpson building was 55 and older. The other 2 are the ones on Baltimore Pike. As you probably are aware of that Christmas tree lot.
Yeah,
They have not started, as far as I know, they haven't started construction. They didn't in July.
right.
The land it was being fenced, but there was no construction going on. So they're probably a year and a half away.
Yeah,
And they will be. Go ahead. I'm
no,
sorry.
they say a year, but I think it's important to note that they are being built smaller, 700 square feet or less. So they don't really anticipate large families.
So those are properties more for like single folks or starting out kind of.
Correct. Correct. And they wanted to embrace the tiny movement. So that's but it still keep up with the need for rentals. But yes, they say they're about a year away, which will probably be your year and a half.
So I know Yaden and Darby are also have some large construction being built or proposed. With those buildings, are we, Dr. B. Coates, in a position to accommodate those students in those areas? Or are we still kind of deciding where those seats might go?
I put the recommendation into the August 5th update as to where the 14 classrooms would potentially go based upon the information that was presented by Mr. Montgomery.
Okay.
And
so are
so
we-
one of the schools is Bell. One is, I believe, East Lansdowne, and the other school, I said we would need to come back and look at the data because you would only have, I think, about 3 or 4 classrooms remaining that you would need. But I did say that we would need to be looking in the Darby area. So Bell would be Yaden. East Lansdowne, obviously, is East Lansdowne, and then we would be looking in the Darby area, either at a Park Lane or a Walnut.
Right, so are you prepared to make those, are you prepared to adjust that recommendation to reflect either Bell or Walnut? In terms of,
Not at this moment. What I had said on August the 5th was that we need to continue to look at the enrollments over time.
okay,
Yep. But I think the way that our long-range school facilities master plan is outlined with when certain buildings would be impacted, we would follow that same timeline with the understanding that updates would be done, hopefully in accordance with the recommendations that were made, if that was the if that's the will of the board.
understood. Okay, any other questions or comments from any other?
Yeah,
board members?
I have a comment. In Darby, the construction of that apartment building, which is non-subsidized, that means it has 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. So that means that's kind of on the side of family oriented as opposed to the buildings that are being constructed, which are 55 and older. So that means there are less school-age kids would be in that area rather than Darby, which has the 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms apartment. So is that factored into where I know Darby, was up as to what, 2 or 3 add-ons? So is that factored into it now? The construction of the 1, 2, and 3 bedroom unit?
I also took into account the information from KCBA as related to what buildings would be able to accommodate additional capacity. And so that's why I was saying the 3 to 4 classrooms that we still have to add. Let us continue to look at the enrollment and what's happening at a Park Lane and at a Walnut to make the determination as to where you would want to put those 4 classrooms. Clearly, there are some, I would just say maybe some land challenges at Park Lane just because of the drop off. But we would need to look at that in comparison to, okay, well, what would happen at a Walnut Street? So that's why I said either one of those schools would, I think, be possible options. But I think we need to continue to look at the data.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And as the long-range master plan, the construction schedules for those 2 schools are further down the road. It's your opinion, there's ample time to continue that study and make the right decision at the right time.
Yes, that's basically what I'm saying. Yes, sir.
All right. Any other comments, thoughts? All right, so without not hearing any, I'm gonna call the evening. I want to thank Mr. Montgomery for his time this evening, for producing the information as well as sharing it with us this evening. Thank you. I want to thank everybody who joined us this evening, and have a great night.
Thank you very much. for
Thank
this
you.
evening.
Have a good evening. Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. I appreciate your support.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Thank
Take